All right. Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Privette from Return on Security, and it is my great pleasure today to be joined by Max, the founder of LimaCharlie, to talk about this really great product launch and the new future of AI and security operations and what it means for all of us. But just to give a little bit of background of those who don't know Max, he's been in the cyber industry for a very long time, worked at some of the biggest companies you could think of: Google, CrowdStrike, Arcadia, even worked for the Canadian National Defense, and has really seen a lot in this space. So I'm really excited to have you join today, Max, and can't wait to hear about everything LimaCharlie's planning.
I'm very happy to be here. I think it's going to be a good discussion.
Excellent, excellent. So, all right, to set the scene a little bit too, obviously AI and cyber is not new. We've heard nothing but AI for the last several years. It seems like. And we've seen many kind of ups and downs, right? Many waves on technology trends and what it means for cyber or what it doesn't mean. But at the same time, that there's been tons of money invested in this space, but the values and all that of coming out of it are still being determined every day. They're still changing, and this is true for not just security, but also for the broader AI industries. But we're still figuring out, how this thing works, so to speak. So with that, I'd love to turn it to you and ask, why now is the right time to go in on AI and the SecOps space and your take on it?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think you're totally right there. At this point, it's become pretty clear that there is a lot of value behind AI, but I feel like we've had a hint that there was some really great value behind AI for a while now. And I feel like we've kind of gone through the first wave of that excitement and the like, hey, it really feels like there's something there. Let's build, solutions. And the reality of it is that we found that like some of those solutions, got outpaced by the advancement of the capabilities in AI. And I think in and of itself, that is kind of like the biggest learning here, meaning the learning isn't like, oh, this is the way that you make a tool with AI that, is like the best, but rather we've kind of all learned as an industry, like, oh, okay, this thing just moves fast. It keeps moving fast. What do we need to index on so that we build solutions and products that kind of are viable within this worldview that like things are moving fast? And so that's where I think we're taking a lot of this as a really deep learning to say, okay, how are we going to, how should cybersecurity be structuring what it does with AI so that it's future proof? I know I don't like the sounding of that, but like that it's future proof, so that we get value today, but we also keep getting value. We don't paint ourselves in a corner. So that's kind of like I think the biggest part of that timing for me.
That makes sense. I mean, obviously, as you were saying that too, it dawned on me just how quickly software development has changed and how quickly features come out now. What seemed to take, the better part of a year or multi-year strategies for a roadmap can now be done sometimes in a weekend, which kind of blows my mind. So, with that, I'd love to hear, can you tell us more about, what you guys have been building, how you have been using AI, and like, what does it look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, it kind of touches on timing, like just to very brief kind of history lesson, not lesson, but, going over the history a bit. In the past year, we've seen MCP come out, right? So MCPs come out. It had a really big impact, but there was a bunch of solutions prior to MCP that like weren't using it. I think everybody saw that there was value. Everybody, built things. But then there was that secondary realization over the year that, hey, MCP turns out is not the answer to all of the problems, right? So it is a great way to enable people to go and connect, very basic, simple things into the AI. But if we take a step back and we say, okay, how do we leverage this at scale? How do we build long lasting solutions on that? The story gets a lot more murky because what we found, very basic example, right? Like what we found is we had about 120, I believe, tools that we have onto our platform, like APIs, stuff like that we wanted to bring to the MCP server, and we very quickly realized that that's not viable. I think we were consuming about 70,000 tokens in the context window right off the bat. So it was just a no-go. So that was a huge wave of learning. I think most of the industry now realizes this. There's there's been some movement on the frontier labs into introducing kind of the next generations of solutions that address that. And so I think all of those things are now, coming together where we have a stack, a technical stack in AI that we can say with credibility, yeah, you can now kind of bring all of your tool set and make this work, and make it work in a fairly generic way, meaning you're not building, your own one-off product against like an API that is fundamentally going to change. And I think that was kind of like wave number one of product in cybersecurity. But I think now we're at the stage where we can truly say, okay, we can see how all those things survive in the future and how they're viable to build a product. So that is why that's how we got to where we are today, and we were able to bring in 120 something tools and really start to, for us, make a big statement and say, AI is kind of now a valid operator onto the platform, and we believe that it will continue to be a valid operator for the future on the same, on par with users through the web API or API users.
Got it. Interesting. It sounds like also perhaps the receiving entities or the people who are working with the security tools are probably a bit more adept than in previous technology iterations, or maybe they're just leaning in a bit more. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've gone. Like, if I think about those waves, right? We've gone through an initial wave of products that were mostly standalone products built onto a very, very primitive way of accessing LLMs, and that were each re-implementing their own, doing very basic tool calling, meaning, like, hey, get this part of the data from this thing. And that was okay because it did not really require any knowledge or understanding from users, right? Like it was a chatbot, very simple, fine. Over time, over the last year, what we've seen is that along with MCP, there's another big change that happened, which is the adoption of the CLI tools. So Claude Code kind of being the first one out there that was like you're getting a lot of wide adoption. They introduced a new paradigm that is now, I can't say it's standard because it's very far from true that everybody's used it, but we can now all see identify the value behind it, and a lot of people have been using it, particularly in software engineering. But both the frontier labs as well as a lot of people in security have had that realization that although this tool was built for software engineers initially, it's kind of, I think it's the browser moment. It's the moment where, hey, we have the browser. It's kind of this very specialized thing for like this thing called the web, and it's really kind of like narrow and obscure. And then people realize, oh wait, I can use this for so many different things. And so we're seeing that with the CLI tools. We're seeing a lot of people running a lot of security operations with those tools. And for those that those at home that haven't used this, the big concept here is not just to have a chatbot that has access to a couple of common use cases that are built into it, but instead it's this idea of saying, look, the models are now good enough that we can provide it with the fundamental tools that can be used in the trade as they are today. So that can be, terminal applications, but it can also be, APIs on security platforms like ours. And the models are now good enough to be able to orchestrate of their own what they're looking for. And so focusing on the outcomes is a big mental shift. And so we're seeing people now run security operations that way. I think that's kind of the biggest shift. And, I don't know what percentage of people have been using it, but we've seen that it's a game changer.
Yeah, it makes sense. And honestly, that kind of evolution from everything gets a chatbot, like every chatbot is very limited scope of operations. It was kind of I think probably a needed first step, but it was definitely a first step. And because not every, what do you do when every product has a chatbot? Do you make them talk to each other? Like how does that work? It just kind of needs that higher level kind of operation. So I know that's something you've been thinking about a bunch too, is like kind of that evolution from more autonomous operator or like operator as opposed to just chatbot assistant. Is there any more you can share, like how you're thinking around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, it sounds like a subtle distinction, I think, until you actually start to use it. I think there's a reason, there's a technological reason why the chatbot started. There's also a industry reason, a business reason. This was kind of the launch of AI. I think security folks saw some really interesting cases in software engineering, like Cursor, right? Like getting crazy valuations. And so I think as an industry, we kind of jumped to the question of like, which company do I need to fund that has the product that's going to achieve the same thing? The difference is that we focused on the adoption and not on, the creation of that product and not necessarily the value right away. So I think that's why this kind of next wave is a lot more interesting. And it comes with these technological changes. So the difference is that, kind of digging a little bit deeper, is that if you're building for specific use cases, right? I'm building so that I can ask this type of question to my chatbot and it's able to answer it. That's good, but it means that you are going to be building use case after use case after use case. This is a very much like a typical old school product development, like life cycle. And that's fine. That's how we've operated for the past 20 years, 30 years. But AI introduces kind of an escape hatch out of a lot of these things, right? It's very different. And I think if we operate in that old school way, we're missing the mark. The whole point of AI is this adaptability. It's the reasoning that it's able to do behind the scenes. And so taking the approach of saying, here's hundreds of tools, let me describe what outcome I want, and you find a way to achieve it, that is magical. Because now it means that we can start to get the value from AI regardless of the area that you're looking at, right? Like the people we're working with don't, we work with a lot of service providers, and so don't look at this necessarily as, hey, I need to be able to do alert triage. And like alert triage is great, but there's so many other things out there that suck time, that are, not fun, that people are not efficient about. And so being able to say, we are going to be able to address all of those at the same, in the same way at the same time. And it is not a question of we need to build a whole product around this one use case. That's a game changer. I think it's how we kind of break out of the loop that was SOAR, right? Like, because, the early chatbots are very close to SOAR. They're kind of SOAR with some fuzziness is how I'd think about it. and like, it's not bad, but that's not where the real magic is.
Wait, so you're telling me that adding a chatbot to everything does not increase shareholder value? I'm not sure I believe you.
It's a great way. Yeah, it's a great way to say that you have an AI story. Right. But like not necessarily the best. Yeah, it's not bad, but I've
got to update some investment memos after this call. But so like this is kind of a good segue too, because talking about the product evolution and talking about how some of these, especially like incumbents who were not necessarily AI native or whatever the terminology you want to use, like they came out using it. Many of which who either acquired companies that were chatbots or built chatbots themselves. How do you think, or how do you view that being kind of fundamentally different to what this new kind of operator style model being, and like how do you think the day-to-day changes?
So I think there's a few things, right? There's a few different categories of players at the moment in that space. I don't mean categories and product category. I mean more in the nature of those players. So number one, I think, I kind of think about like the AI SOC. And I think that's kind of the one we've been mostly kind of sort of referring to, meaning those are brand new startups. And they are attempting to leverage AI, and AI is the product, right? Like as a new startup, you have to make money, you have to have a moat. The idea that you're going to be training those models or like building that model, I think is not realistic anymore. The frontier labs have kind of proven this year that however good you might be at building your own model, in a generic way, the frontier labs are just going to outpace you. They've kind of reached escape velocity. The other part of this is the secondary challenge is that for those companies, they themselves don't have the capabilities, meaning they have the AI, they have the knowledge, they have experts, but they don't have the I don't know, like the SIM or the EDR or the name it, right? So what we're seeing in the industry is that it's a little bit of a regression to the same issue that we've seen service providers having. So LimaCharlie works so many service providers, which is everybody on day one starting a service provider wants to support everything out there, and that's it's a great philosophy, right? Like it's good. Ideally, we don't want to force anybody to do anything, but the reality is, at your 10th EDR and your 10th SIM and your 10th name the product, you start to realize that that's not tenable. And so I feel like that, the AI SOC kind of, approached this with, with the innovation spirit, which is great, right? Like, hey, we think AI is going to be able to do that. But I think in reality, they're finding that it's still really problematic because it implies that they still need to build a lot of infrastructure. And that's kind of what we've observed even at the MCP level. We've seen a lot of those early companies build a lot of infrastructure. to, like connect with this provider, connect with that provider. And then MCP happened, and they had already built so much infrastructure that they were kind of like, oh, what should we be doing? So anyway, so that's kind of category number one. I think it's very challenging. Actually, the last part I think that's kind of worth calling out is for anybody that's tried to use that is the cost, right? Because you're dealing with a startup that has to make money and has to have a moat. It means on the moat part, right? It means that it's going to be a black box. Because they need to have a moat. The underlying model is not going to be the moat because the frontier labs are going faster. There's very few places where you can really, like put your moat. And on the money side, it's just crazy expensive, right? Because they're going to be selling the AI. So they're going to be selling per token or some proxy metric like per alert. And that's really hard. It's crazy expensive. So, that's a really tough area, especially when you start to look at this and you say, what about for service providers? So now that cost that you had, right, as an enterprise, and you start saying, I've got 4,000 customers, like just nope, right off the bat. The second big kind is the legacy big fives, right? The ones that kind of build a new product every week because they get to have the SKU, and then large enterprise can say, yep, I checked the box, I have the SKU now, and kind of this perpetual machine now. So that would be like the CrowdStrikes and the Palo Altos, the huge guys. They have the capabilities. So that's great, right? When we compare that. That being said, there are also public companies, incentive to go and say, okay, AI must be a product, because this needs to be a new SKU that we start selling. So there's still kind of that slant of, well, it's not necessarily about the outcome. It's kind of very much product first. Fine. The other issue, the real issue, I think that they're hitting is that they have been building for people for a really long time, right? So if you look at a CrowdStrike, all of them, it's a lot of growth through acquisition. It's a lot of bundling, right? They're mostly bundlers. Meaning they will go to a company and sell this product and that product and that product. They've been built in silos. They're put under a web portal, and it's kind of close enough to say that it kind of works together. And so that's their space. So when they look at the product that they want to build, they're going to look at the chatbot, and they're going to say, what are the use cases that we're going to sell our customers? Well, use case number one is this. Use case number two is this. And then they're going to have to build the APIs behind it, the access layers, a lot of things, because they were built for humans clicking through a web portal. And so that's, again, right, it goes back to the problem of being kind of sore with a little bit of fuzziness. So I think that's kind of the structure. Candidly, we have stumbled in a way into the right pattern for us, right? LimaCharlie is a hyperscaler for security operations, meaning we've built as a cloud provider. So API first. And when we say API first, we really truly mean it, right? We're APIs, and we happen to have a web portal. And so this turns out to be the way at this point in time to be able to leverage all of those capabilities and let the AI be this operator of those capabilities. Look, a year ago, that was not the case, right? A year ago, you could not give, whatever GPT version was out there, full access to those tools. But now we're absolutely there. And it means that now viewing the AI as an operator means that you get access to the value across the whole stack. It's not just about doing alert triage or about doing this or about doing that and waiting for the vendor to release the product that does AI for onboarding new customers. No, it just means you can ask it to go and take care of onboarding or take care of triage or take care of doing this weird operation that one of your customers has asked you. You can kind of like do all of it when it's an operator. You focus on the outcome.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And honestly, something you said that kind of stuck with me too is AI doing a lot of the operating now, and how most of the software we've used in the industry is built for ClickOps, which was kind of the only way. Of course, there were some CLI entry points, but it wasn't always made for kind of mass scale. I would say automation, yes, but not orchestration, not coordination across things. And I know service providers, MSSPs or MDR operators are like some of your biggest customers. So can you tell us a little bit more of like, what does it mean for them, especially as they're, very price sensitive, they're scale sensitive, they're speed sensitive, all these things. Like, what does it mean?
Absolutely. So it means a few different things. It means a few different things, right? I think the aspects are, you touched on like the margins that, if you're a service provider, it's your margins. It's your product. It's how you do business, right? So it's not just some cost center that, you kind of have to be careful about. Around the product, the product for an MSSP, for a service provider, is the service itself. And so I think it's a big part of the discussion. Let's start with the basics. The ability to pay per token always exists. It's always possible. All of the frontier labs kind of like, push this forward. You can do it. However, one of the realizations that we had was that a lot of the operations here, rely on an analyst or a human operator to go and say, like, I want to have this outcome. And these are flows that are currently supported by the CLI tools that I mentioned, with some scaffolding, some things kind of put around that, which we are putting open source, we're putting out there. But the fundamental, like, key difference here is, the frontier labs like Anthropic have their own subscriptions, right? They have subscription service that you can say, I'm going to pay $100 a month and I get near infinite-ish, use of the model. I don't have to pay per token. I don't have to think about it, like all that stuff. So it transforms, for a service provider, how you look at the economics, right? Prior to, the LimaCharlie kind of strategy here, you would have had to say, okay, we have an average of 100 alerts a day per tenant, and we have X tenants. So how many tokens or how many dollars per alert? Okay, $5 per alert and then you make that equation, and then you cry yourself to sleep and decide not to do it. The new way is now you can say, hey, it's $100 a month. This is the $100 a month, per analyst, right? So it's not purely $100 a month. But now you can predict exactly what your costs are going to be without having to worry about kind of the what happens if one of my tenants goes crazy or anything like that. So that's a big part of it. What you get from that is access to not just, like we were saying, like a single use case, but it's to an infinite, honestly, number of use cases, right? It's the ability for you to go and say things like, here's a couple of examples, right? So, hey, I have a customer that is currently, we're authenticated with a bunch of CLI tools. They have some Azure footprint, some AWS. They use, Azure AD, and they use this and Okta and that, blah, blah, blah. the ability for a junior analyst, like a level one, to actually go and say, hey, AI, like Claude Code, I want you to onboard me into LimaCharlie. And that sounds super wide, but it's actually, not that wide. Like obviously, like LimaCharlie, through the open source, we kind of injected some thought into that, where we describe, look, LimaCharlie is a security platform. So like onboarding really means discovering as a customer what platforms do you have in your environment, do you use, and based on those, okay, what makes sense from a security perspective to have? Well, your Okta logs, like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. This particular internal production web app that you have, maybe it's not as important. For the AI to go through all of this, discover all of these, then to you as an operator, to the human, to go and say like, hey, here's everything that I've seen in your environment. You've got like 5,000 Windows machines in this type of environment. You've got 100 machines in Azure. Here's all of the logs, like everything. Like, are you cool with me just onboarding all of this into your tenant in LimaCharlie? And then clicking yes, and then it happens, right? Like that's pretty magical, because we talk to a lot of service providers, and it's like, it would take, I don't know, like 2 days for a senior analyst to go through these processes and do all of that. So that's great. But then we can also get into well, what if React to Shell came out right during the holidays? I'm waking up one morning and I have no idea what React to Shell is, or what it does, or what I should be looking for. So I can ask the AI and say like, hey, do a bunch of research on this, find out, what the IOCs are that are, related to this, or the techniques. And then for all of this, if they're IOCs, go and check them out against all of my tenants. If there are behaviors, well, it's a bit more complicated. So like generate detection rules for these, do retroactive queries, make sure that the rules don't hit all super often, like evaluate how many false positive we would have, like do that tuning in general. And then from all this, bring it all back. Tell me, do I have any customers that are affected right now? And stage this for me to go and, with my approval, go and deploy all of this on all of my tenants, so that I now start detecting it. That isn't one use case, right? Like it isn't one flow. It's like doing some research, having some, awareness of how cybersecurity works. It's being able to understand how to look at historical data. It's being able to understand how to deploy or engineer new detection rules. It's understanding about what it's like to run a SOC. One can make a rule that fires 5,000 times a day. Like that's useless, right? Especially at scale. So it's it's a lot of different things. And that's where this kind of operator and outcome mentality really comes in. It's to unlock those types of use cases. And you've got this across the board. Like that's kind of the beauty of saying, LimaCharlie as a whole is accessible to AI operators. I can even go and say, you know what? I'm curious today. How much is my spend on data sources across my 5,000 customers? I would like you to, create an Excel spreadsheet on this, do some like analysis on that, find me the outliers, generate me a report and the Excel spreadsheet, display that to me in, graphs that show, this bit related to this bit for all of my customers. That report doesn't exist anywhere on earth. It's got nothing to do with alert triage. It's got nothing to do with anything else. But because as an operator, it has access to the platform, it's able to go in and figure out how to go and achieve all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's super impressive too. And it honestly, it gives you a bit of space to start thinking about the business of security operations as opposed to the reactive nature of it as well. Because all of those the kind of workflows you described are typically multiple people, several teams, often lots of back and forth with customers. Not an easy thing to pull together many spreadsheets to come up with maybe a right answer. And then, by the way, you need to write it up for your executive suite as well, and customers to share, every hour, especially if it's a big event. So I think that's a pretty big unlock too. And I think, circling back a bit to some of the kind of native like AI SOC players, like, do you see this as something like a gap that they can, or chasm they can cross in this capacity, or are we really talking apples and oranges in terms of like, the services providers and customers who aren't those?
I mean, look, nothing's impossible. But in the same way, my go-to comparison back in the day was, around hyperscalers was, look, IBM could have been AWS. There's no technical reason they couldn't, except that it's a really, really big ship to turn, right? So I think that applies for the large players. The large players don't really have much of an incentive at the moment to go and do that, because that means, candidly, like LimaCharlie does not charge for AI. Like it's this fuzzy just nature of the platform and how we put out there. So I think the big players have very little incentive to do that. The small new AI SOC players makes it really difficult for them to do that as well, for kind of the same reason. The other part of this is it's just a lot of it's a technical challenge as well, right? Because what we found while doing this is it would be a lie to say that Claude, for example, Claude Code can operate as an expert on LimaCharlie from day one. That's just not true. There's a lot of things that are that need to be that the AI that need to be taught to the AI. Not in terms of like training, but in terms of like English explanation of like, hey, this is how this part of the platform interprets this thing, right? And so for a smaller player, that is a lot of it's a lot of glue that needs to be put in there. So it's going to be very, very challenging. And that partially explains the use case based approach, right? Like we're going to attack that one use case and like make that happen well across 50 different SIMs, right? Cool. And that's where I think the advantage of a hyperscaler in our case really comes through, is we are able to put this, in open source, right? Like this is not a product. We're not, in a weird way, like we're not selling it, which is very funny, but we are just driving pure value to users. And I would say almost more importantly, we make it really, really easy for those users to go and extend it if they want, right? There's not a single line of code in this hard coding that a billing report needs to do blah, blah, blah. It's all English. And so it is an absolute certainty that, we have service providers that use LimaCharlie. And you know what? They don't like the way that we think about hunting retroactively for an IOC, and so they forked repo, or they just write their small English document in Markdown that kind of describes a little bit. Actually, we want you to favor this when you look at this part of the data looking historically, and that's fine. They didn't have to wait for a vendor. They didn't have to get a developer to go and do this. They, just had to have somebody on their side to go and say, like, we've been using it. We want to, do things this way instead. And they were able to go and build their product, which is their service, so that they can keep differentiating, themselves in the market, right? I think that is an incredible engine for differentiation for those service providers, because it gives them that ability to create and do things differently without having the development team.
Yeah. Oh, it's really that like kind of extensibility that, there's so many options in it. It's funny to think about it too, because, I think when an AI was first coming out, a lot of people thought like, oh, great, it's going to do all the boring stuff, and humans get to be creative. And then I think over time, people realize that humans aren't actually that creative without some buffers and some guardrails or some like at least direction. Um, so thinking about that, like as far as we've come, like where do you still see the gaps? Like where do you still see there's like things to color in?
That's a great question. It's AI is moving so fast, right? That's part of it. So I think kind of touching on like a thing that you mentioned, I think there is not everybody has kind of like that imagination part, right? But there's a good percentage that, let's say, to pick a number, 20% in cybersecurity does have that drive. The challenge historically is that you would have to also ask, well, is that 120% also good software engineering, right? To go and build the automation and have the time to spend in doing all of that. And now you've lowered that bar. Now you can really truly say, this person has a great idea. They went for it. They did it. Because Claude Code can even code for you, right? I mean, that's kind of the very first use case that they had. So we are seeing people that even use it in LimaCharlie to go and say, hey, Claude Code, build a Python playbook for me to go and do this and automate, like to do all of that. So I think going forward, almost more important than what exactly is going to get better is making sure that we can capture that value as it happens, right? So that for me, that's kind of philosophy number one. Is the day that Opus 5 comes out, we need to be able to go and immediately turn it on and just keep moving. If we have to say, well, let me take a few weeks and do some evaluation or refactoring the code and all of that, like that's going to be really problematic as things keep going faster. Now, concretely, where things are going to get better, in my opinion, there's probably two aspects. One is around the orchestration of things. So I think that the AI today, we are seeing some traction around things like sub-agents, things like that. It's going to get a lot better so that the size of the outcomes that we're looking at, that the AI can handle, will just keep getting bigger and bigger. That will also enable much better ongoing processing by AI, right? So lots of use cases around that, like around long investigations, all of that. The other big change is going to be around the economics as well. So that's kind of the boring parts of this, but I think the economics are going to be such that the cost of models is going to be going down, and that's going to mean that the access to this or like the equation that you make around, where's human versus, human assisted, it's going to keep going on the side of like human assisted is definitely the best way to go and do this. So I think those are like going to be the really like the big differentiations and the big movements in the future.
And that makes sense too. And it reminds me of Jevons like paradox, where it's like, making something more efficient should decrease the need for it, but actually greatly increases the demand for it, like far outpaces it. I think you've seen a really great example of that with just AI usage in general. And so like once that kind of operator mind's like unlocked about what's possible, I don't think there's ever any going back.
That's right. And that even with within specialized domains, right? I think maybe that's kind of one thing I didn't really touch on, but cybersecurity is a somewhat specialized, like it's a specialized domain. I say somewhat because it's vaguely adjacent to software engineering. But the models are just getting better in general. We've even seen internally some shocking ability to do reverse engineering adjacent like tasks from the base coding models. So their reasoning capabilities are really, really good. And so I think that's going to keep getting better as well. And look, if there's one lesson that we've learned from the software engineering side of this, and I keep going back to it because when you look at AI and you look at adoption, by far, right, the tip of the spear is software engineering. And the lesson there is, if you think today, like, hey, this use case or that use case not going, like it's not doing as well as I liked it, or like 6 months ago, I tried to make it do X, you're going to be lagging behind, and it's just moving so fast and the capabilities are so incredibly undeniable. In in software engineering, we started the year with like, hey, this is pretty impressive. It's probably going to go somewhere. And if you look at, what folks in software engineering are talking about today, it's beyond undeniable that, this is going to be a fundamental shift in how we do things. So all of those things together mean this is a really critical place.
Yeah, I think I saw Linus Torvalds over the weekend talking about using AI to develop features. Like if that is not a signal, like that's I don't know what is. But
that's right.
So it's like, so building on that, like, so, obviously we've come a long ways and we kind of understand what the gaps are, but like, so based on that, what do you think success looks like for like LimaCharlie, 12, 16 months out from now?
So here's my prediction. We were already, so LimaCharlie, right? Again, hyperscaler, we were working with a lot of service providers that were on the mature side of things, right? People that know very well how to do cybersecurity, had some software engineering chops. They were able to leverage the value of LimaCharlie, meaning, scale up much more easily, get much better margins for what they're doing, automate a lot, produce products that are very differentiated, all that stuff. With this move of bringing AI as a on par operator in LimaCharlie, I think this bar goes way down. Meaning, look, it's still, I think it still requires a service provider or an enterprise, candidly, that, wants to do better and wants to automate things. And, it's kind of like looking at that, the product from that perspective, because there are a lot of service providers that do look at it from the, hey, I resell the CrowdStrike SKU and like, I'm fine, right? Like it's a convenience thing. And like, yeah, that's great. You and 20,000 other people resell the exact same thing. If you're fine with that, that's cool. But I think now we're going to see a lot of those service providers that want to do better, want to differentiate, that have a lot of great people with the cybersecurity mindset and the ideas to start to be able to leverage that and leverage LimaCharlie without having kind of like the deeper software engineering chops, but get that value. I think the other thing we're going to see is we're going to see folks building the next generation of SOCs on top of LimaCharlie, because it provides these superpowers to people, and it has this ability to be leveraged through AI. It means that it's by far the best platform for somebody that has strong opinions about, very powerful things that can be built with AI or that leverage AI to go and achieve these things, right? It's the old hyperscaler thing, right? And if you start a tech company today, you don't rack and stack your hardware on day one, right? You go to AWS. So I think there's still a lot of that direction happening, and so I expect to see people building things that like we never even thought about being possible on top of LimaCharlie.
Well, I can see a future where bring your own SOC becomes a new acronym. You can like build from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, look, cybersecurity is a funny industry sometimes, right? We are dealing with technology day in, day out. We deal with attackers that rethink how they're doing attacks, all the time. I remember the beginning of ransomware. Like, I remember having the thought process of like, they did what? And like, oh yeah, you don't have to just steal information. It's a whole new way of doing crime. Yet, as an industry, right, it feels like we're not really actually that. We're pretty risk averse. We're still thinking in terms of like the same old like bundler, ways. Like, look at McAfee and look at CrowdStrike, and like things haven't really changed all that much in many ways. So I think AI, I'm hoping kind of like brings a little bit more of that spark of people rethinking, like you say, like bring in your own SOC. Is there a world where people own their infrastructure and are able to assemble a SOC, like dynamically, from different experts in the industry? I don't mean like assemble as in like synthetic analysts. I mean, literally bring in this reverse engineer so that they can, connect into your own infrastructure. You provide, narrow access, and they can leverage AI to go and build some capability for you and then go away, right? Like so many different models that are fascinating to think about.
Yeah, definitely. It's probably the most exciting time in the cyber industry since I got into it, 20 plus years ago. Just like what's possible at this point. And thinking of that, kind of as we come to the close of this, like for the security practitioners watching this, like, do you have any advice or final words for them to carry on in this new world?
Yeah. Yes. From what I've learned on the software engineering side of things, right? Like, because again, they're at the tip of the spear. I believe quite strongly that it's the same pattern is going to be happening in cybersecurity. And what we're seeing is it's not a question of you learning a narrow specific new tool, or like, having this one idea of how to do things in AI. The fundamental truth, if you ask all of these software engineers, right, like how did they get to do like the best decisions, like how they have to think about differently, it's the thinking about differently, it's the experience of it. Meaning you have to go and, day one, maybe do something that's really simple, and that's fine. And then day two, something a little bit more complex, and maybe it's not going to work. And you're going to look at it, and then you're going to understand, have that kind of like slight mentality shift of like, oh, this is why it didn't work. And it's these dominoes, right, in front of each other that end up to lead you to those really major shifts in how you do things. So, don't try it for 5 minutes and go like, this is, I don't like this, right? It's a thing you have to exercise, do it, and then you start to really see where the value is. And that's when those really great outcomes come out of that. So I think it's super critical for people to go and make the first steps. Just make the first steps, and you will see that, it's just going to keep accelerating. And once you've had that realization, going back is not really an option.
Makes sense too. And speaking of making the first steps too, I think you guys have a community version, right? That people can jump on.
That's exactly right. Right. So like putting all the things we kind of talked about. Yes. We have a community edition. So you can get 2 tenants for free and 2 EDRs per tenant. and external telemetry flowing in as well. The AI part of all of this, like we don't charge for that. We see as kind of just a core nature of our platform. So, you do bring your own license kind of thing, or, you use Claude Code locally or Codex or whatever you want to use. And we have a public repo for this that where you can see kind of all of this training, like how we talk to the LLMs and explain our platform that you can still leverage as skills. And so putting all these things together mean, hey, install it at home and play with it in your own lab, or, at work with the first customer or anything like that. If you have a credit card, you can also just go and never talk to anybody on the LimaCharlie side if you want, and just, go and build things. But obviously we're always there to like answer questions, but all this to say, I think we've broken every barrier, that is there to prevent somebody in cybersecurity from actually going, trying and doing it and discovering all of this.
Amazing. I think it's a super exciting time to be in this space too. And Max, thanks so much for your time. This has been really great. I really appreciate learning all about this new kind of paradigm shift you've been working on. And I think there's no going back to this.
My pleasure. It was a great chat.
Likewise. And so now we're going to transition to our next part. It's actually a panel discussion. Speaking of no going back, the title is No Going Back, AI redefines SecOps for security and service providers.